Time moves like water through cupped hands, impossible to grasp, yet leaving its mark in subtle ways. Such was the afternoon when Marcus Holloway, aged 26, sat alone at a corner table in Rosemary's Diner, a modest establishment nestled within the unassuming borders of Lakeville, population 18,371. The restaurant buzzed with the mundane symphony of silverware against ceramic, muffled conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter that punctuated the otherwise unremarkable Tuesday. Marcus absently pushed his mashed potatoes into geometric patterns, his mind drifting between thoughts of work deadlines and weekend plans that would likely dissolve into solitary walks and paperback novels. The ordinariness of the moment was disrupted by a presence, subtle as a change in barometric pressure before a storm, but just as perceptible to those attuned to such shifts in the atmosphere. More coffee. The voice carried notes of warmth that seemed to resonate with something forgotten in the chambers of Marcus's heart. He looked up to find eyes of jade green studying him with gentle curiosity, framed by cascading obsidian hair that fell in perfect waves past delicate shoulders. Her smile, immediate and genuine, transformed her already striking features into something that words in Marcus's vocabulary seemed insufficient to capture. The name tag pinned to her crisp uniform read, Janie, though it seemed too ordinary a name for someone who appeared more like an artist's masterpiece given temporary life. Her movements as she refilled his cup possessed a fluid grace that suggested she existed slightly out of sync with the crude mechanics of the everyday world. "Anything else I can bring you?" she asked, her voice somehow penetrating the ambient noise of the diner with crystalline clarity. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, fumbling for words worthy of the moment, when a crash from the kitchen drew his attention momentarily away. When he turned back, the space beside his table was inexplicably vacant, as though Janie had been nothing more than a momentary hallucination born from loneliness and too many late nights. He scanned the restaurant in confusion, but the dark-haired waitress was nowhere to be found. When he inquired about her to an older server, he received only a puzzled look and assurance that no one matching that description worked at Rosemary's. Puzzled but not overly concerned, Marcus paid his bill and stepped into the afternoon sunlight, unaware that his life had just pivoted on an axis that would forever alter its trajectory. Days accumulated into weeks, weeks compounded into months, and months eventually stacked into years, yet the memory of the raven-haired waitress with emerald eyes refused to fade from Marcus's consciousness. Rather than diminishing with time, as memories naturally should, the encounter at Rosemary's took on an almost mythic quality in his mind, becoming more vibrant and detailed with each mental revisitation. He would find himself unconsciously searching for her face in crowds, experiencing momentary surges of hope when glimpsing long dark hair in his peripheral vision. Despite encouragement from friends and several promising introductions, romantic relationships inevitably floundered as Marcus found himself measuring every woman against an increasingly idealized phantom. His professional life thrived, advancement came steadily, bringing with it financial security and respect among peers, but in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, Marcus would often wonder about the woman whose momentary presence had somehow carved such a persistent absence in his life. Was she real, or merely a projection of his deepest longing, a perfect composite formed from fragments of dreams and forgotten wishes? The question remained unanswered as the calendar pages turned with increasing speed, bringing Marcus to his 36th year, still haunted by a ghost he could neither exorcise nor embrace. The October afternoon in Wellington Park arrived without ceremony, simply another Sunday in Marcus's methodically organized life. The maple trees had begun their annual transformation, their leaves displaying defiant bursts of crimson and gold against the advancing gray of autumn skies. Marcus sat alone on his usual bench, a well-worn paperback open but unread on his lap, his attention instead captured by the hypnotic dance of falling leaves. The air carried the distinctive melancholy of the season, that peculiar mixture of decay and preservation, endings disguised as transformations. A slight pressure on the bench beside him drew Marcus from his reverie, and the shock of recognition nearly stopped his heart. There she sat, impossibly, undeniably, the very same woman who had vanished from Rosemary's Diner a decade earlier. Her green eyes held the same luminous quality, her smile the same gentle knowing, her features unmarked by the passing of 10 years. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" she offered, as though they were old acquaintances temporarily separated rather than strangers connected by an impossible coincidence. Marcus struggled to maintain composure, afraid that any sudden movement might cause her to vanish once again. They spoke of simple things, the weather, the changing colors of the park, the book he wasn't reading, while Marcus's mind raced with unarticulated questions. How was she here? Why hadn't she aged? Was this the same woman? Did she remember him? Before he could summon the courage to ask anything of significance, she glanced at her watch, a delicate silver thing that seemed out of place, as though from another era, and said she must be going. Marcus turned briefly to place his book in his bag, a movement lasting no more than 3 seconds, but when he looked back, the space beside him was empty. The indentation where she had sat was already disappearing, like ripples resolving back to stillness on a disturbed pond. This time, Marcus was left not merely puzzled but deeply unsettled, a sensation of existential vertigo that would color his perceptions for years to come. The second disappearance affected Marcus more profoundly than the first, creating hairline fractures in the carefully constructed normalcy of his existence. He began keeping journals, detailing both encounters with obsessive precision, as though the act of documentation might somehow validate experiences that increasingly seemed to defy rational explanation. Friends noted a new restlessness in him, an uncharacteristic tension that manifested in interrupted conversations and distracted glances toward doorways and windows, as if perpetually anticipating an arrival. Marcus began researching missing persons cases from the region, scrolling through digital archives of local newspapers, even consulting with a therapist who gently suggested his encounters might be manifestations of unaddressed loneliness rather than objective reality. Yet Marcus would not, accept such explanations. The green-eyed woman had occupied the same physical space as him. She had cast shadows, displaced air, left impressions on surfaces. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she existed, and this certainty became both an anchor and a tempest in Marcus's increasingly turbulent inner life. As his 46th birthday approached, Marcus had built a successful career as an architectural consultant, owned a tasteful home on a quiet street, and had cultivated a small circle of loyal friends, all the outward markers of a life well lived, yet remained unmarried, unattached, his heart preserved in a state of perpetual waiting for someone, he couldn't logically expect to encounter again. The third encounter occurred on a rain-slicked Tuesday when traffic had congealed into a frustrating standstill along Main Street. Marcus drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, the windshield wipers creating a metronomic rhythm that matched his growing impatience. Glancing absently to his right, his heart performed a familiar stutter step of recognition. In the adjacent lane, behind the wheel of a vintage blue Volkswagen Beetle, sat Janie, eternally youthful, eternally beautiful, her profile illuminated by the glow of the traffic light. Sensing his gaze, she turned, and their eyes met across the narrow gap between their vehicles. The world around them seemed to fall away, the rain, the traffic, the impatient honking, all receded into insignificance compared to the miracle of this third impossible encounter. Marcus raised his hand in a gesture somewhere between a wave and a plea, and she responded with a smile that contained universes of unspoken meaning. Then the light changed, and before Marcus could react, she accelerated smoothly forward, the blue Beetle quickly disappearing into the blur of traffic ahead. Marcus attempted to follow, but other vehicles cut into his lane, and by the time he reached the next intersection, the blue car was nowhere to be seen. That night, alone in his home, Marcus openly wept for the first time since childhood, not from sadness precisely, but from the peculiar ache of experiencing something profound that could be neither shared nor substantiated, a private miracle that sounded like madness when translated into words. The years that followed unspooled with relentless momentum, carrying Marcus deeper into middle age while the memory of Janie remained curiously untouched by time's erosion. His once dark hair had begun its inevitable surrender to gray, lines had etched themselves around his eyes and mouth, physical testament to decades of laughter, worry, and the unavoidable weathering of existence. Yet professionally, Marcus had achieved a level of success that surprised even himself, his architectural consulting firm now employing a dozen people, his designs recognized for their innovative approach to communal spaces. Despite numerous opportunities for companionship, some promising, some merely convenient, Marcus remained essentially solitary, his emotional life governed by a peculiar fidelity to encounters that occupied an uncertain territory between memory and dream. Friends eventually stopped asking about his romantic prospects, accepting with varying degrees of understanding that Marcus Holloway was simply one of those people destined to walk through life unaccompanied. As his 60th birthday approached, Marcus had made peace with this reality, finding satisfaction in his work, pleasure in his friendships, and a certain tranquility in the rhythm of days that, while not exactly what he had once imagined for himself, contained their own measure of contentment. Yet beneath this hard-won equilibrium ran an underground river of wondering, not regret precisely, but a persistent questioning of paths not taken and choices not made, all centering around a green-eyed phantom who had appeared 3 times across the span of 20 years, each appearance as inexplicable as it was transformative. The evening at Clayton's Bistro began as unremarkably as thousands of other evenings in Marcus's life. At 63, he had developed the habit of treating himself to a solitary dinner at the upscale restaurant once monthly, usually bringing architectural journals or design proposals to review while he ate. The restaurant's subdued lighting and tasteful decor created an atmosphere conducive to both concentration and relaxation, allowing Marcus to occupy that pleasant middle ground between work and leisure. He had just begun to review preliminary sketches for a community center project when a familiar sensation, a change in the air's density, a subtle rearrangement of the universe's particles, caused him to look up from his papers. Time performed one of its peculiar suspensions as Marcus beheld Janie standing beside his table, notepad in hand, unchanged since their first encounter nearly 4 decades earlier. Her beauty remained as startling as ever, not the manufactured perfection of magazine covers, but something more elemental and true, a harmony of features that suggested design rather than accident. "Are you ready to order?" she asked, her voice containing the same musical quality that had haunted his memories for decades. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his smartphone, activating the camera with fumbling fingers before she could disappear again. "Just one moment," he managed, raising the device and capturing her image, proof, finally, that he wasn't simply a lonely man constructing elaborate fantasies from momentary encounters and wishful thinking. Janie's expression flickered briefly, surprise, perhaps, or something more complex, before she offered a small, enigmatic smile and stepped away from the table, disappearing once more into the restaurant's shadowed corners. Later, examining the photo, Marcus would find her image perfectly captured, the cascade of dark hair, the intelligent green eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, all preserved digitally in crisp detail that left no room for doubt. She had been there, as real as the tablecloth and wineglasses also visible in the frame. The revelation brought not comfort but a deepening of the mystery that had defined so much of his adult life. The conversation with Rebecca Thornfield, his former high school classmate now serving as the town's historical society president, was supposed to be about potential designs for renovating the society's small museum space. They sat in a quiet corner of a local coffee shop, architectural references spread between them, when Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification. As he reached to silence it, the screen illuminated with the lock image he had chosen, the photograph of Janie taken at Clayton's Bistro 2 weeks earlier. Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was audible even above the ambient noise of the cafe. "Where did you get that picture of Janie?" she asked, her voice suddenly tight with emotion. Marcus explained his most recent encounter, but as he spoke, he watched Rebecca's expression transform from shock to profound concern. With gentle but unmistakable certainty, Rebecca explained that the woman in the photograph was Janie Aldridge, who had grown up in their hometown but had tragically drowned in Lake Morriston during the summer after their senior year of high school, more than 40 years ago. According to Rebecca, Janie had been swimming with friends when she suddenly vanished beneath the surface. Despite immediate search efforts, her body wasn't recovered until the following day. The community had mourned deeply, as Janie had been not only beautiful but genuinely kind, the sort of person whose loss created a palpable absence in the fabric of the small town. Marcus listened with growing horror, the architectural plans forgotten between them, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was hearing with the experiences that had shaped 4 decades of his life. How could he have encountered, multiple times, a woman who had died before he ever met her? What possible explanation could bridge the chasm between Rebecca's matter-of-fact account and the reality of the photograph on his phone? Without finishing their meeting, Marcus mumbled apologetic excuses and fled the coffee shop, his worldview unraveling with each step toward home. The evening hours passed in a blur of confusion as Marcus paced through his home, alternating between examining the photograph of Janie and searching online archives for confirmation of Rebecca's story. There it was, in digitized newspaper records from 45 years ago, a black and white photograph of Janie Aldrich accompanying a tragic headline about her drowning, her face younger but unmistakably the same woman who had appeared to him throughout his life. The article described her as beloved by all who knew her, and mentioned her work as a waitress at several local establishments while attending community college. Marcus's hands shook as he closed his laptop, his mind reeling from implications too enormous to fully comprehend. Had he been haunted all these years? Was Janie some kind of ghost, anchored to this world by unfinished business that somehow involved him? Or was there a more complex explanation, one that transcended conventional boundaries between life and death, past and present? Exhausted by questions without answers, Marcus eventually collapsed onto his living room couch, still fully dressed, the weight of the day's revelations pressing him toward an uneasy sleep. His last conscious thought was of Janie's smile, how it had seemed to contain a knowledge beyond her apparent years, as though she understood something fundamental about existence that remained hidden from him despite his additional decades of life experience. The transition was so seamless that Marcus didn't immediately realize he was dreaming. He found himself walking along a path in what appeared to be Wellington Park, though the colors were more vibrant than any he had ever experienced in waking life, the green of the grass almost luminous, the blue of the sky impossibly deep and pure. The air felt different somehow, carrying scents more vivid than mere olfactory sensation. Each breath seemed to convey not just fragrance but emotion and memory, as though the very atmosphere was permeated with consciousness. "You finally made it," came a voice he had carried in his heart for 40 years. Turning, Marcus beheld Janie approaching along the path, carrying a wicker picnic basket and wearing a white sundress that seemed to capture sunlight and transform it into something tangible. Her smile contained no sadness, no mystery, only genuine joy at their reunion. "I've been waiting for you," she continued, reaching for his hand with casual intimacy, as though they had never been separated. Marcus looked down at their joined hands and was startled to see that his own had reverted to a younger version, the liver spots and prominent veins of age replaced by smooth skin and strength he had not possessed in decades. A quick assessment confirmed that his entire body had somehow returned to its mid-twenties state, matching Janie's eternal youth. "I don't understand," Marcus admitted, though the confusion carried no distress, only a quiet wonder at the impossible becoming real. With gentle patience, Janie led Marcus to a sunny clearing beside a lake more perfectly blue than any earthly water he had ever seen. As she spread a checkered blanket on the grass and began unpacking the picnic basket, she explained the nature of their reality with the calm assurance of someone sharing self-evident truths. "What you perceived as my appearances and disappearances were actually glimpses across dimensions, moments when the veil between worlds grew temporarily thin," she said, handing him a glass of wine that tasted of sunlight and summer rain. "I've been waiting for you to cross over completely, to join me in this reality where time doesn't constrain or diminish us." The world around them, this vibrant, hyper-real version of the familiar, was, Janie explained, the genuine article, while the reality Marcus had inhabited for 63 years was merely a shadow play, a dim reflection of the authentic existence they now shared. "Your life there was necessary, a journey of learning and preparation, but it was always meant to be temporary," she continued, her green eyes reflecting depths of knowledge and compassion that transcended human limitation. "Every time our paths crossed, I was preparing you for this transition, helping you understand on some level that there was more awaiting you than what that shadow world could offer." As comprehension dawned, Marcus felt decades of longing and confusion dissolve into perfect clarity. His lifelong sense of waiting, of being slightly out of step with his surroundings, suddenly made complete sense. He had been sensing this truer reality all along, catching glimpses of his genuine home through the distorting lens of temporal existence. As they shared their picnic beneath an eternal afternoon sun, Marcus understood with absolute certainty that he had not lost his life but had finally, after 63 years of preparation, found it. In the world of shadows, Marcus Holloway's housekeeper arrived for her regular Tuesday cleaning to find him still dressed in yesterday's clothes, peacefully still on the living room couch. Medical authorities would later determine that he had passed quietly in his sleep, likely from natural causes associated with age, an unremarkable end to a life that, from external appearances, had been successful if somewhat solitary. A modest funeral was attended by colleagues, clients, and the few friends who had maintained connections with the increasingly reserved architect in his later years. Rebecca Thornfield, remembering their last unsettling conversation, placed a single white lily on his casket with a whispered, "I hope you found your answers." The town newspaper ran a respectful obituary highlighting his contributions to local architecture, the scholarship fund he had established for aspiring designers, and his quiet philanthropy that had benefited numerous community organizations over the decades. What the obituary could not capture, what no earthly document could possibly record, was the reality that Marcus himself was experiencing as these somber proceedings unfolded, hand in hand with Janie, exploring endless landscapes of imagination and beauty, their laughter echoing across dimensions where love transcends time and death is revealed as merely another threshold to cross. In this true world, where moments expand into eternity and joy is the natural state of being, Marcus and Janie began their authentic life together, not as ghosts or memories or dreams, but as beings fully awakened to the limitless possibilities that had always existed beyond the thin veil of what humans mistakenly call reality.